hope it actually goes through, and then are we ready to let everyone in and hit start webinar?
I will hit start webinar right now.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
And then Laura, I'll be over to you.
Great, thank you so much. And welcome to our wonderful meeting with Simone and Nicole. Before we get started, I would like to just review some of our basic how-to for the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and it will be shared afterwards. As you are logging in, if you see the globe along your control panel, from here you can select your language, Portuguese or English. In the meeting webinar controls, click the interpretation button with the round globe signal. Click the language in which you would like to listen. Thank you.
Good morning, one and all. To quote First Lady Dr. Jill Biden's remarks from the International Women of Courage opening ceremony, there are women everywhere whose voices need to be heard because stories are powerful. They shape our lives, defining the shades of our joy and sorrow, dividing what matters from the rest. They're how we understand and connect to each other beyond language and distance and time. They foster empathy and compel each of us to act. The story that you get to hear today is moving and one that I am thrilled to be bringing to you. My name is Courtney Brooks, and I'm the Executive Director at Global Ties KC. As a nonprofit organization in Kansas City, we have the immense privilege of welcoming you to our talk today. Now in its 16th year, the Secretary of State's International Women of Courage Award recognizes women from around the globe who have demonstrated exceptional courage, strength, and leadership in advocating for peace, justice, human rights, gender equity and equality, and the empowerment of women and girls in all their diversity, often at great personal risk and sacrifice. As a part of the program, this year's 12 awardees are taking part in an international visitor leadership program, Virtual Exchange, to connect with their American counterparts. While Global Ties KC works on around 30 of these projects a year, this particular program is one of the most moving and impactful based on our incredible visitor. Simone Sibilio de Nascimento is one of Brazil's most prominent prosecutors and a former civil police delegate and captain of the military police. Ms. Sibilio has served as a prosecutor for 18 years with Rio de Janeiro State Public Ministry, where she plays a vital role in combating organized crime and public corruption, militias, and drug trafficking. As a lead prosecutor in several high-profile cases, Ms. Sibilio de Nascimento has demonstrated her willingness to tackle controversy and expose gender-based violence and attacks on social activists. She was the first woman to lead MPRJ's specialized unit tasked with combating organized crime. I'm also excited to introduce you to Nicole Fisher. Nicole is the founder and owner of Fisher Law, LLC. Nicole focuses her practice exclusively in family law litigation. She prides herself in providing her clients with skilled advocacy while being compassionate to the crisis at hand. She is licensed in both Kansas and Missouri, and her background includes time working for the federal public defender in Las Vegas, clerking for the Honorable Marco Roldan here in Missouri. Nicole is actively involved with various bar associations, including as an executive committee member for the Association of Women Lawyers, chair-elect of the Missouri Bar Young Lawyers Section, and a member of the American Bar Association, Kansas City Metropolitan Bar Association, Johnson County Bar Association, Eastern Jackson County Bar Association, and American Anna Courts. I'm now going to turn things over to Nicole and Simone, but you are welcome to add questions into the chat box as we go, and we will get to them towards the end of the hour. So without further ado, Nicole, over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. Simone, thank you so much for joining us today. It's so lovely to meet you and to have this opportunity to talk with you and learn a little bit more about you and your experiences in Brazil. One of the first questions I had was, what is the educational process to become a prosecutor or a lawyer in Brazil?
Bom dia, Nicole.
Good morning, Nicole. For me, it's also a great pleasure to get to know and to have this conversation, exchanging experiences. Well, In Brazil, there is an organic division between the different careers in law. You have a career as a public defender. You have as a lawyer, similar to what you do, probably, and also working for the judiciary. Except that the private law practice, you have no competitive examination open to the public. But to be a prosecutor, you have to sit this examination, one of the most difficult tests that you have to go through. The same thing is to become a judge. And then we have the law practice that's public and private. In the private side, you can become a rich person, defending people here in Brazil. But if you work for the government, don't get rich. You get enough to pay your bills. But also, to become a public defender, you have to go to this examination. The majority of the states have a public defender. So somebody that doesn't have the means to pay for a lawyer, the state will appoint a defender. If the person has the money, then of course they will hire a private lawyer. That's similar to what you do. We have big law practice offices here in Brazil too.
So like in the sorry, go ahead.
Out of these three functions, prosecutor, lawyer, judge, before you do this competitive examination, of course, you have to go through college, you have to go through law college. And here, the college is, to become a lawyer, it's a 5-year program.
And that was my question, because I know in other countries, like in the United States, you usually go to undergrad for 4 years and then 3 years of law school. But I know in a lot of other countries, it's one program. Your undergrad and your law study is the same. Is that the same in Brazil?
Nicole, could you repeat your question? I didn't quite get it. Well,
so it's in the United States, it's basically 2 programs that you do, and they're not even usually related. It's kind of an odd way to you become a lawyer, is that you do 4 years of undergrad and it can have nothing to do with the study of law. And then you have 3 years where you study law. So it's 7 years altogether for most programs to become a lawyer here.
Nossa. Então, 4
well, that's quite something. So you have 3 years of specific laws. So the 3 years that you're studying to work as a lawyer, this is in any area of law. Say, if you want to work on the criminal area, so you have the 3 years that you study the criminal area, or you study the whole thing and then you choose your specialty afterwards?
You basically learn general law for 3 years. You get your law degree, and then you go out in the real world and learn whatever area you want to do. So then if you wanted to become a prosecutor, you would then go to the prosecutor's office, but there's no like specific training you do before that or a test you take before that. You just kind of start on the job and learn.
Aqui no Brasil, Nicole,
well, here in Brazil, Nicole, to become a lawyer, you have to do law school in 5 years. And in order to practice law, the person has to sit an exam at the bar. Only after passing the bar, you're going to get your credentials, and then you can have your practice. If you don't pass the bar, you can't go in. Let me give you an example. I was a degree on public safety. I was an officer, police officer. This was my first profession. And then you have to do a competitive examination to go into the police academy to be in a boarding school for some time. And then after that, I wanted to do law school. So again, I went to college for 5 years. I finished college. Could I practice law? No, I had to sit the bar exam first. Then I was approved, but I could not practice law because I had the law degree, but I was an officer of the police. And being an officer, you cannot be a lawyer. So if I left being an officer, then I could become a lawyer. But I never worked at the private practice. My whole life I was a public servant.
Because you started as a police officer at 18, is that correct?
Isso.
It is correct, yes.
And then you transitioned to being a lawyer. Why did you decide that you wanted to be a lawyer after being in the police at 18?
Porque à época,
Well,
eu precisava...
it had to do with the time. I needed money at the time. Because you see, as an officer, you get paid to study. And my family at the time, they could not afford, for 5 years for me to go to college. So it shows a profession that I could study, and I could get paid to study. So when I had the money to study law, that's when I did it. And that's why I entered the law. I sat the competitive examination to be the chief of a precinct of the police. And for that, in Brazil, you also have to have a law degree. And then I did another examination to become a prosecutor, and then became a prosecutor. But before, I was a police officer, then I was a captain, a precinct, and then finally, I was a prosecutor.
And how long have you been a prosecutor?
18 anos.
I have been a prosecutor for 18 years.
And I believe right now you kind of specialize with organized crime. Is that correct?
Sim, sempre,
Yes.
desde quando eu ingressei.
Actually, since I entered the police as an officer, I was already interested in the criminal organization.
And what drew you to organized crime?
Eu já trabalho na área criminal há 32 anos.
I've worked in the criminal area for 32 years. I can actually require my pension, retirement pension, in 2 years, but I don't think about that. I observe that when a crime happens, but within the context of a criminal organization, it is very difficult to identify the authorship, the culprit. There's always an attempt of those people who are victims of these criminal organizations. These people, they need a response. The victims need a response. And this is the thing that instigated me. It was this concern with the victims. When you have a simple crime, I have no issues. We managed to find the culprits and sentence them. But when you deal with organized crime, it's a lot more difficult, the investigation. The culprits are normally unpunished, and we never give an answer to those victims. And this is why I ended up specializing in this area to fulfill that need.
And are the victims of organized crime more disproportionate men or women, or what have you kind of found in your practice?
Depende muito.
Well, it actually depends. But for you to have an idea, here in Brazil, in terms of homicides, we have a great number of women being killed by their husbands. In Brazil, we have a very advanced law. We call it the feminicide, female side. And women are victims, and I'm talking about the gender, could be a trans, but if the person feels himself as a woman, then she will be a woman. And we have a great rate of homicides there. But homicides in general have a very high rate. Younger, older, women, men, we all die. But we have a very high suicide, homicide rate. But as a rule, the younger people die more. Because you see, when you consider the drug dealing, the drug dealers have a very short life. Their life expectancy is 25 to 35. This is the life that they chose, and they kill each other all the time. So the young people die most in Brazil.
And what do you think it is about when people are separating or divorcing that relates to an increased rate of homicide?
Nós aqui no Brasil, hoje, esse assunto, para você ter uma ideia,
in Brazil, this matter is being very much discussed in Brazil right now. It's like at the top of all the buzzword because of this violence. But divorce should be the first step to end a marriage. But you can see that all the way to get the separation, there is a long period of tensions, of quarrels, of confusion between husband and wife. So when they grant the divorce, all the way to the divorce, we have a great number of violence. It starts pulling the hair and goes all the way to a homicide. Just to give you an idea, I was helping this family that the husband killed the wife with stabbed 10 times in front of the 4 children. And the oldest, 23, the daughter, and one was 10, 3, and 6. All of them, they saw this. I had a meeting with them to see if they needed some help, and also to introduce me to them so that they could know who were the prosecutor, they could count on me. I informed them about the process, and I asked the eldest daughter, who is dealing with your expenses right now? Because the father is in jail. Mother was killed by the father. Says, it's myself. I am selling meals to support the family. Did they fight a lot? Yes, they did. And he did not accept the separation. When she decided to leave home, he killed her. And this is happening daily. Every 9 minutes, a woman in Brazil is suffering from violence.
Wow, that's astonishing. How do you think this gets turned around?
Well, I think we have to empower women. There is a strong campaign in the whole world so that the women will report these aggressions so that they can have their independence, the freedom of coming and going, of being married to the man or not, because he's not her owner. But there has been a great evolution because before women would never report. Now, today, I have a great number of women being killed or attempts of a murder against this woman. And what's sad is sometimes this woman, she survives and she forgives the man.
So like in Missouri and Kansas, we have no fault divorce. So you can ask for a divorce at any time for any reason. And I think that that's one way that the court system here has kind of dealt with combating the finger pointing of whose fault it is as to why we're getting divorced, because the judge just basically says, I don't care why someone has decided to get divorced. We're getting divorced, we're calculating child support, we're dividing property and moving on. I don't know if that's the same in Brazil, but I think that that's one way here that we've kind of dealt with concerns about the finger pointing that just adds to more propensity for crime, is that it's no fault. So it doesn't matter. You can ask for it at any time.
Sim, eu tenho uma dúvida com relação.
Yes, I have a question about your area. How does it work in Missouri, Nicole? This question of the separation. Does the woman, is the woman entitled to alimony from the husband?
Yes. So especially if there is a great disparity of income, the woman is entitled to alimony or maintenance, child support, and we will enter temporary orders and even giving her money for attorney's fees. And so that, especially if you have one spouse, usually the husband, who has resources and access to all these resources, that he can't then just basically out litigate her, so that she can still get maintenance, child support, and then reasonable attorney's fees to be able to then employ her own counsel. Is that how it works in Brazil, or is getting temporary orders while you're going through the process very difficult, which kind of leads to just heightened emotions for everyone?
Aqui no Brasil também é
In Brazil, it's like that too. But there is some difficulty from the judges to give alimony to the women. They give to the kids. For the women to, they think that the women have to have their own lives, have to work. So it's not an easy thing that the woman has rights to alimony. I'm going to give you an example. In my case, my actual husband was married before, and he does pay alimony to his ex-wife, but for a certain period of time. It's the period of time that the law gives so that the woman can get organized, can get settled in her life. We have something that says this: the husband is not the welfare system. The woman has to work. You have to go and provide for yourself. If you got separated, the husband has to pay child support to the children until 24. The child can receive child support as long as they're going to college. But in general, it's until 18. But if they're going to college, they have the right to child support until 24. At 24, there's no more child support from the mother or the father. I don't know if it's the same thing there in the US.
So it's state by state. In Kansas, it's till 18. They don't have any provisions for college unless the parents agree to it in their original divorce. In Missouri, you can get child support until you're 21, so long as you're going to college. And some people feel very strongly about that law that basically obligates parents to pay for college if they get divorced. While if they had stayed married, there is no obligation under any law that you pay for your kids' college. So it's kind of an area of the law that sometimes is very hard for clients to understand. But my question for you is, so you're prosecuting all these organized crimes. How many trials are you doing in a week?
Ah, sim.
Oh, yes. Like This week, I have 3 trials, not necessarily with organized crime. The one that I had on Friday, for example, was organized crime. It was 10 attempted murders that were practiced by a criminal organization that were done or attempted. I am the prosecutor in the jury here. So the reason could be organized crime, but it could not be. It could be a feminicide. A man killed his wife. So I work with any kind of homicide, which is the most serious crime in Brazil, homicide. As a matter of fact, it's all over the world. But I work specifically with the homicide. I am a prosecutor, like a trial prosecutor here in Brazil.
And are all of your trials done in front of juries, or are they done just in front of like a bench trial with a judge?
Sim, nos Estados Unidos, é muito parecido com os Estados
It's
Unidos.
very similar to the United States, but here in Brazil, we have the jury. We have a first phase where a judge, like the judges in the United States, is taking care of the whole case. So that judge decides if it's going to go to trial by jury or not. And it's in general like that. In a second phase, there is that special session in the jury trial. So the judge is always presiding over both phases, but the ones that decide at the end are 7 jurors. I know that in the United States, you have 12 jurors, right? In Brazil, it's 7.
And does it have to be unanimous, or is it just majority wins on the jury's vote?
Aqui, a maioria ganha. Diferente.
Here is majority wins. It's different than the United States. Here in Brazil, we don't have what you have there. There in the US, the jurors get together and talk about the verdict. They choose one to be like a secretary, like a president of the jurors, and they decide. Here in Brazil, the jurors can't talk to each other, and each one gives their vote. So they count the votes, and the vote is by a majority. So the most emotional part of the whole thing, it's in a special room, a secret room, and the prosecutor, lawyer, judge, and then you count the votes. Yes, no, yes, no, and your heart's beating really fast. Because when you have a vote to not condemn or to condemn the person, to find guilty or not guilty, it's so like thrilling, this part.
And that is so different from how our system works. I worked for a trial court judge who had a criminal docket, a family law docket, and a civil docket. And he would get assigned some of the most serious homicide cases in Kansas City. And so at the end of the presentation of evidence, the jurors go and they go and deliberate. Well, my office, I shared a wall with them. And these deliberations are very intense. Some people are very passionate about their side. And so this can go on for a couple of days, that they are in a room, and it's a very small room, and they're basically now deliberating and arguing why this person should be guilty or not guilty. But it sounds like that is not that's not what happens at all with your jurors. They then basically just go and do an independent vote.
Exato. Aqui no Brasil.
Exactly. Here in Brazil, we don't have this deliberation. In Brazil, we have something that we call no communication at all. They cannot talk about the case. The vote here in our Constitution is a secret vote. So one juror cannot talk to the other one about their vote. I know that in your country, they deliberate, and here not. Why is it like this here? Because here in Brazil, we understand that the person who has to convince and say this person has to be acquitted or guilty, found guilty, is the prosecutor, because the prosecutor will spend 1 hour and a half if it's one defendant and 2.5 if it's 2 or more defendants. On Friday, when I had that trial, I talked about this 2.5 hours, talking about all the argument I had, why they had to be found guilty. And the defense had the same opportunity, 2.5 hours. Then I could rebut, and I talked to 1 hour and a half. Then the defense could do a rebuttal for another hour and a half. So you could show the evidence by both parts, and all the juries do is listen and see. So they decide what their vote is.
So you don't have murder trials that last 2 and 3 weeks. There are very strict time limitations as to each side what they get to produce for their evidence.
Sim, nós temos julgamentos que duram.
Yes, we do have trials that last longer. Like we had one in Rio Grande do Sul, which is the south of Brazil. It was a 10-day trial. It can last more time if we have a lot of witnesses, and up to the time that we have to speak, all the witnesses have to be heard first. First, there is the testimony, then you have the questioning of the defendant, then that's when the parts start arguing. And if there's a lot of witnesses to be heard, then the trial could last longer. But when the two sides are speaking, we have a set time for the parts to speak, for the two sides. In the US, do the two sides have a set time to speak?
It really depends by the judge, but I think some judges will put you under a time constraint depending on what they think is best. However, it sounds like that the time that you're allowed is kind of your advocacy time. That is the time that you're trying to convince someone of your position. It's not the time that you're having to put your witnesses on, because that's where I was just, my mind was going to be blown. I was like, I don't even know how you would do a homicide trial, including witnesses, in 2 hours. But it sounds like that doesn't include witness time.
A gente tem que ter poder de.
We have to have a great power of argumenting and argumentation in order to show the evidence to the jurors. As the witnesses are talking, the jurors, they already realize what's going on. So it's common for me to show the case to the jurors, bring documents so they can see things. I have to convince them in 1 hour and a half if it's only one defendant. If it's more than one, 2 or more, 2.5 hours to convince the jurors.
Which is not a lot of time. And so basically you call all of your witnesses and put your evidence on, and then you get an hour and a half to try to put all the pieces together and convince these jurors why they should vote for you, basically.
Ah, sim. Eu não sei se eu consegui me...
Yes, I don't know if I explained myself. The witnesses, they are heard. It's not within that hour and a half. That 1 hour and a half is my time for argumentation because the witnesses have been heard. There is no time for the witness testimonies. It's as long as necessary.
And so when you are trying sometimes 2 or 3 murder cases in a week, what are kind of your core values that get you through a week like that?
Então, eu procuro
Here in Brazil, we don't always have to ask for a guilty verdict in every case. As a prosecutor, I have to fight for justice. If I analyze the whole case and I realize that there is no evidence, I have to ask for not guilty, even if the defense lawyer is going to ask for not guilty. But here we use this name, prosecutor of justice. I don't have to always accuse. If there is a reasonable doubt in the case, I can ask for a defendant to be found not guilty. And I've done that before. And when I am a prosecutor, doesn't mean that I have to always ask for them to find the defendant not guilty or acquit. But the case can get to the jury, and if there is like weak evidence, they will lack, and there will be doubts, they will lack evidence. In Brazil, we have this independence that we can talk to the jurors. We can say, sir, ma'am, the proofs are this and that, but the prosecutor's office has doubts, so we can ask you to find this person not guilty. So most of the times I ask for a guilty verdict, but I've asked for the defendant to be acquitted at other times.
So if you have the ability to get up in court and argue for a not guilty, do you have the ability to dismiss the case before it ever goes to trial, since you as the prosecutor have looked at it and said, I don't think that there's enough evidence here, let's just dismiss the case? Or is it only the judge that can dismiss the case?
Não, o promotor pode pedir a absolvição.
No, the prosecutor can ask for the acquittal, and then the judge will acquit, and the case will be over. In that case, the jury are the ones that are going to vote for acquittal or not. If the jury understand that that person was not the defendant, the one that committed the crime, they will give a verdict of not guilty, and the judge will record that the defendant was acquitted.
So at any one time, approximately how many cases do you have assigned to you as the prosecutor?
No meu tribunal do júri tem correndo 1.200 processos.
Oh, I'm sorry. In my courts, there is 1,200 cases going on at the same time in general. What about you, Nicole? How many cases are you involved with in general?
So for me, at a given time, probably 50 to 60.
Para mim, é na faixa de 50 a 60 no geral.
Oh.
So you can have 1,100 cases at one time.
Sim. Sim, eu atualmente...
Yes, because it works like this. I'm with the trial court, for example. There are 1,200 cases going on, and these cases come to me every day. Every day, I get like about 20, 10 for me to analyze, and I return it. I read, analyze, and return it. Besides that, I have trials. So besides working in the cases, I have to do some trials. So it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work.
So what do you do in your spare time to re-energize yourself and kind of give yourself some self-care to do this?
O que você faz na sua hora de lazer para você se reenergizar e te dar aquele, né, prazer, aquela parte mais legal?
I think you're in the wrong channel.
Nicole, you should be good to continue.
Pode até
Okay, I'll just re-ask
parecer,
my
pode
question.
até parecer
So,
que não.
It seems
Go ahead.
it seems that it's not true, but it is. I really enjoy doing what I do. When we have at the end of a trial, we hug the victims or the family victims. They are thanking us. This is something that makes me feel very happy to go to bed, to wake up and do the same thing all over again. But sometimes I go to the beach on Sunday. So it's something that I like the most, is to walking on the beach. This is the way I reinvigorate myself, if you will.
And what are your professional goals in the future? Like if you were to say what you thought you'd do 5-10 years from now, what would you say?
Eu me imagino fazendo
I see myself doing exactly what I do today, with the same will, the same purpose to do what I do, because I really enjoy, I love what I do. I'm very dedicated. And I imagine that you might be the same way. I believe that you want to continue doing what you do, continue being a lawyer. Am I right?
You know, I think a lot of people, if you ask them why they go to law school, it is to help other people. But you are right, sometimes that's not where the highest paying money is. It is, you know, the attorneys that work in the everyday, prosecutors, public defenders, I would say even family law attorneys that are representing real people with real problems every day. I think that the biggest reward you get is knowing that you made a big difference. I've always said there's no better feeling than walking out of court and that hug from your client when it's over. Is it kind of gets you like, this is why I went to law school, because I wanted to help real people with real problems. So it sounds like you're very similar.
Eu não tenho dúvidas.
I have no doubt about it. In you, for instance, you practice law, or you have another kind of a function, another job, or you only practice law?
I only practice law, and I only practice family law. So I have done some criminal law in the past, but I don't do any criminal law anymore. I just do family law, and I tend to do very highly contested cases. I have another law firm that does just uncontested cases, and it's called Drama Free Divorce. But I own that law firm and oversee it. However, I unfortunately don't get to do the legal work in that. It's really for couples that want to sit down and get their divorce done, but they have to all be on the same page. But in my other law firm, Fisher Law, is where I spend most of my time, and I litigate highly contested custody cases or property cases. And it's a lot.
Eu imagino que seja muito
I
desgastante.
can imagine that it might be something very, very tiring, very demanding. This family law involves a lot of feelings, people that are being hurt because of the separation, because of the divorce. Isn't that true?
You know, I often say, I think that sometimes, depending on how contentious the divorce can be, it's harder to go through a divorce than it is harder than to maybe lose your co-parent or spouse in an accident, because your heart is literally broken. This dream you had of this life that you were going to have together and the children you were going to raise together is not going to happen. And some people can move on from it and, you know, see that maybe they were never well matched and, you know, life will continue. Some people just kind of go, my life is over. Like, there is nothing more for me to do. And so I think that sometimes dealing with just how high emotionally charged these people can be on a daily basis. And what I always try to remind them is that I look at life as a book. And this is just one chapter. This chapter is really hard and it really hurts. But I promise you, this isn't how the book ends. You will have more chapters. This will get better over time. You will probably get remarried again. You might even have more children. And they always look at me like I am crazy when I say that, especially in really contentious cases. But I say, this is a chapter, and I just need you to focus on this chapter, not worrying so much about how the book ends, because I can't tell you how the book ends today. We're just going to get you through this chapter, and this chapter sucks and it hurts, but we're going to get you somewhere better.
É interessante,
Yeah,
exatamente.
quite interesting. That is the same thing that I do for my clients. The trial is going to arrive, and then you're going to turn the page of your life. You're going to start a new life, a new path, different, without that person that was killed, that died, but now with the feeling that the justice has been served. And that's the same approach that I adopt. That's the way I talk to the victim's family affected by the crime. So you work with divorce. So you have a lot of divorce cases, new cases of divorce per year. You have a lot of new cases of divorce per year. What is your average, if you will?
Yeah, yes. And I will say during the pandemic, it became, our filings went through the roof. I think that a lot of marriages that maybe had some cracks in them became canyons when they basically had to stay in the same house for weeks on end. You know, for some families that, you know, maybe one of the partners traveled Sunday through Thursday and then would get home Thursday night in time for the weekend. And then they would have kid extracurricular activities all weekend. So everyone's running all around and they leave Sunday night again and they just kind of redo it. Maybe their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was getting by. And when the world kind of shut down and travel was over for those people that travel for work all the time, extracurriculars were gone on the weekends, and you had people sitting in the same house for a long period of time, it was fascinating to see how many people were coming in and how just unbelievably busy we got during that time, which that was not what I thought was going to happen during a pandemic. I thought, who gets divorced in a pandemic? This is hard enough. But we have been incredibly busy ever since COVID hit, and it's just not stopping. I also think that people have reevaluated their lives and what's important and how they want to spend their time. And I think that COVID made a lot of people just kind of stop and pause and think about their lives when before they were just kind of going through the motions and moving as fast as they could.
Aqui no Brasil.
Yeah, here in Brazil during the pandemic, the number of domestic violence also increased a lot, exactly for the same reason that you described. A lot of people at home, the marriage is not going well, but because of the pandemic, the number of battery cases, domestic violence, you know, they skyrocketed during the pandemic.
And I think the exact same thing happened here. I have different friends that all they do are either domestic violence prosecution, or they're domestic violence judges. Their dockets went through the roof. And then at the same time, you had kids here not going to school. And so there was a huge uptick in child abuse. And it wasn't getting reported as quickly as it normally would have because there was no school counselor, there was no teacher. And so it really devastated a lot of people for multiple reasons and multiple dynamics that made us see how important it is, I think, for people interaction, especially if you're in a domestic violence situation or a child abuse situation, that those people in those situations desperately need third parties to help and advocate for them and provide them support when they're going through the hardest part of their lives.
Vocês têm muitos casos de abuso infantil aí?
You have a lot of cases of child abuse.
I really don't, thankfully. Once in a while I'll have some pretty severe
Muitas
ones.
vezes eu tenho casos de pessoas que Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Oh, I luckily in my private divorce practice really don't have that much child abuse. Once in a while, I'd say once or twice a year, I'll get a really horrific one, but I sit on a board in Kansas City that works with, it's called CASA, and it works to advocate on behalf of children that are in the juvenile court system and from child abuse. And the amount of placements that they needed during COVID was out of control. I mean, they just couldn't service the need fast enough. And it was heartbreaking to think that, you know, that these children were just kind of stuck in this position because there was no school open and these kids weren't attending virtually. They don't have computers attending virtually. And there was no third party to help them. And so we're still dealing with kind of the unwinding of that, even as schools reopened, and there's just not enough resources to go around right now.
Yeah, here in Brazil, we have a few cases of child abuse, and always cases very, very hard, because in most of the situations, those child abuse cases are not seen by anyone. And there's also cases of miscommunication of a child abuse, or there was a situation of revenge, and we gotta be very, very careful, paying attention, just to say that we are not going to commit any injustice.
Absolutely. Do you ever prosecute any child abuse cases, or I would even hate to say child homicides?
Sim, vários.
Yes, several. There are cases, they are very complex. I had a case when the father's lover killed the child, the daughter. So she was the lover, and the father ended the relationship, and she killed the girl. She went to the family's house, kidnapped the little girl, strangled her, 5 years old, and put it in a huge box. So it's a very, very sad case, had a lot of repercussion, and they were called the Beast from a part of the city, Rio de Janeiro, Baixada. It's a neighborhood here in Rio de Janeiro. And she was condemned to the homicide, which is 30 years in Brazil. And I was part of this trial. I was investigating as well in the trial.
Do they have life sentences for homicide in
Eles têm ali
Brazil?
sentenças de pena de morte no Brasil?
Não, aqui não tem pena de morte.
No, we do not have life sentence and not lifetime imprisonment. The highest sentence in Brazil is 30 years. But someone can stay longer than 30 years if it's being criminally prosecuted for several crimes, but he will also stay in jail for 30 years. This is the maximum in Brazil.
And can you get out earlier than your original sentence for like good behavior, or if there's overcrowding in the jail, they'll sometimes make some decisions?
Sim, aqui no Brasil é país que eu entendo muito benevolente.
Yeah, here in Brazil.
In Brazil, in my opinion, it's rather benevolent with such laws. There are many benefits that people can access. There is a progression of the time of the penalty. Sometimes the person just do 1/6 of his sentence, and he can go from open to semi-open to open. So there are a number of things that the person can apply. So it's very difficult for one to go the whole sentence. There are pardons sometimes. There's also the possibility of reading in jail and using that as education, and therefore diminishing the sentence. There are many benefits to the criminals. I believe that you also have that, right?
Yes. We do. There's different things that can happen, that someone's sentence could be 50 years and it somehow only happens to be 20 years. But we do have life sentence. And then where I used to work, I was a public defender that only handled death penalty cases. So I dealt with all their post-trial motions after they had been sentenced to death, which I don't believe Brazil has the death penalty.
Eu não entendi o que seria feito após o julgamento. Não
I didn't
entendi.
quite understand the post-judgment situation.
So once you've been found guilty, you can file post-trial motions. You can ask for a new trial. You can say that that juror shouldn't have ever been put on that panel. You can try to just basically contest the jury's verdict. And then if you've been sentenced to death, there's a lot more that you can start contesting too.
Ah, sim. Aqui no Brasil, sim, são os recursos, é uma garantia constitucional.
Yes, in Brazil, if your appeals, it's a guarantee given by the Constitution. You can go all the way to the Supreme Court for that.
A diferença é que aqui no Brasil,
The difference, perhaps, is that in Brazil, the court, when you have a sentence for homicide, if the judge gives that sentence, the most that they can do is to cancel that trial and arrange another one. But the court cannot go against the desires of the jury. They can cancel it, but they cannot change the sentence. If the jury has condemned, it cannot be undone. You have to do a new trial that way.
And in Brazil, the jury decides the sentence.
yes. Sim, eles são soberanos.
Yes, they have the full decision on that.
And that's very different from here, because the jury will decide if you're guilty or not guilty, but then it's the judge that will decide at the sentencing hearing what your sentence is.
Sim, aqui também no Brasil, veja.
Well, here too, let me explain. The juries that decide is guilty, but it's the judge that will give the sentence, because this is the judge is the one that will establish the penalty. If there is an appeal, then the court can reduce the sentence, but they cannot change that decision.
It would have to go back for a jury to decide if there was a new trial granted.
Exato. Isso. Se o tribunal entende que
Yes. If the court decides that there is a new judgment, then there will be a new trial. If there's a new sentence, the same one, they cannot change. You cannot change the sentence given by the judge, but they have to give the sentence if it's condemned. But the court cannot change the sentence of the jurors, because the judge is the main authority in the matter. Then the court can change with the decision of the juries. Here in the US, can you change the sentence?
They can. They can. It's very different. Or they can decide to. There's a whole way that you can basically decide like that they need to have a new trial, and the prosecutor can say, I'm not going to prosecute that, and then the person is just let go, which sounds very different than how it works in Brazil. And I know we're getting short on time, but there is just one last question I really wanted to ask you before we close and start answering some of the questions that have popped up. Is who's the one person that you would say has helped you navigate your professional life the most? Who's been like your biggest mentor, or someone that you really looked up to for advice and guidance as you've made your professional career?
Pode repetir a pergunta?
Can you repeat the question? It was not very clear for me.
Who is one person who has really been instrumental in giving you guidance or being your mentor or support for your professional career?
Ah, sim.
Oh, yes, okay. Well, I don't think here in Brazil, I had persons I could call my mentor. I think I had several mentors in my career, different people that I admired, that I wanted to follow, like women, strong women that came before me. I look at them, admire them, and say, I want to be just like them. But there's many people, it's not just one.
Women supporting women.
Yes, sim.
Yes.
Absolutely, what it is all about. Thank you both for this hour and this conversation. There are a couple of questions that have come up in the chat box. So the first one is, how is jury selection different in the United States and Brazil?
Well, in the United States, it's done by voir dire, and basically you'll bring in like 100 jurors, and then the prosecutor and the defense attorney will get to ask a bunch of questions, and then depending on how those questions are answered, people can be struck for cause. And then after that, every side gets so many that they can just strike for whatever reason, and then that's how they get to their 12. That's a kind of Cliff Notes version of how jury selection works here. I don't know about Brazil.
No Brasil, anualmente é feita uma listagem geral.
Well, every year we have a general listing of possible jurors depending on the population of the city. It could be 1,500 names. The names are available in the regional election courts in different institutions. This number gets to the court. Then there is a sort of a raffle where the names are pulled out. And then out of, they need to select 7. Here, the prosecutor and the lawyer, they do not ask questions to the jurors, but they can refuse 3 jurors on Judgment Day without giving any reason for it. Now, there are questions to the jurors from the prosecutor and the lawyer.
So for the next one, so it seems that you, Nicole, are involved with a number of professional organizations and associations, and that's typical here in the United States. Are there similar networks of women in professional associations in Brazil, or is it a different system?
Associações, sim, existem vários movimentos, várias organizações.
There are several organizations, NGOs, that dedicated to the causes of minorities and women. But in Brazil, there is a tendency to achieve equality between men and women. But what we see is that the number of women that are approved in these competitive examinations is much greater than men. This is why in Rio, in the public prosecution service, we have more women than men. But in such institutions, the public prosecution services, there is not a group of young or associations that dealing with women that are prosecutors, but there are other associations that just deal with matters that are important to women.
And then next one, it is so interesting to hear these experiences in the legal field. No matter what country you live in, this career requires a significant amount of endurance, resilience, sacrifice, and passion. A question for both of you. Are there any aspects of your job that were unexpected or surprised you in a positive or negative way?
I would say I didn't realize how exhausting it could be, to be honest with you. I would always hear that you work a lot. But I love trial work. It is one of my favorite things about my job, but it is next level exhausting. I think I usually cry about 2 days before every trial, just out of pure exhaustion. But then your adrenaline just starts kicking in and you're like, I'm going to go do this. And when it's done, it is the best feeling in the world.
Eu acho que é por aí também, assim, aqui.
I believe the same feeling. Very, very exhausting. It demands a lot from you, a lot of time you have to concentrate. But then trial day, you relax, at least on the sentence day, and then you rest a little bit and ready for the next one.
Wonderful. And I have one final question for you, Simone, and then I think we're going to wrap it up for the morning. How can we here in the Midwest of the United States support you and your work?
Olha, eu estou à disposição para
Well, I'm available to any question, any virtual chat. If you want to come to Rio de Janeiro and visit me, you're welcome. And of course, I want to know your city. So I'm available. You can contact me through my email, my phone, 24/7. If I'm not working, well, that is, I'll be available. And then I can talk about my profession, about my state. I can show you how do I do my work here, things like that.
I'm all for coming to visit you in Rio. That sounds amazing.
Ótimo.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Well, then on behalf of Global Ties KC, Meridian International, and the Department of State, we all look forward to coming down to Rio to visit you in person in the next few years. And as always, you are always welcome here in Kansas City in the Midwest, and we look forward to the day that we get to meet you in person. Any final thoughts or remarks before we wrap up for today?
I'm just going to say it was a delight to get to talk to you, Simone, and you're honestly an inspiration to, I think, all of us here that have been listening to your story of how you got to where you're at and what you do on a daily basis.
Eu também quero agradecer essa oportunidade de conhecer a
I
Nicole.
would like also to thank the opportunity of getting to know Nicole. You're very congenial. You transport this niceness to us. I also would like to thank all of you. This is a real invitation. I will welcome you with a great warmth and show you my work here. It will give me great pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, then that concludes our event for today. As I mentioned in the beginning, Simone is one of 12 awardees of this year's International Women of Courage Award. And there are other events going on across the network and across the country in the next couple of weeks that we will be posting across the Global Ties KC social media channel. So be sure to check those out. And we look forward to hopefully seeing everyone in Kansas City in person on May 19th for our annual celebration. So with that, thank you both so much for being here, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Obrigada, bom dia. Bye bye.
Thank you very much. You all have a good day. Bye.